What's going on, guys? So as promised on my Facebook and Twitter, I'm going to be doing a series of Mission Impossible reviews leading up to Rogue Nation. Now you may be asking yourself, Chris, didn't you do that like 4 years ago? Yeah, I did, but Paramount's kind of annoyed with the fact that I used to put trailers in my reviews, and they gave me copyright notices on all of them, so I had to remove them. But you know what? That's kind of a blessing in disguise, because I didn't put as much effort into my reviews back then, and I'd love to cover those 4 films in a more in-depth way. So let's get started with Mission Impossible. And as a warning, this review will contain some spoilers for the film, because you know what? It came out almost 20 years ago, so if you haven't seen it yet, I would suggest checking it out. It's a lot of fun, but let's get started. I've been a fan of Mission Impossible almost my entire life, and not just because of these films. My dad showed me the original television show that they're based on when I was a kid. We used to watch it together on television all the time, and when this movie came out, I was super into the Nintendo 64 game for Mission Impossible as well, even though Tom Cruise didn't let him use his likeness. I thought the game was actually a lot of fun back in the day, and I loved the things that they say. The voices in this game are amazing. Like sometimes when you shoot somebody in the game, you get this weird radio transmission that says, "Way to go! Way to go!" I used to rent this game from Blockbuster like every couple of weeks to try to get farther in the game because 5 days just weren't enough for me. I wanted more all the time. Now, Brian De Palma directed this movie, and it stars Tom Cruise as Ethan Hunt. At the time of this movie's release, he was not known to be an action star. A lot of people weren't sure if he could pull this off because up until then he was the risky business guy or the Few Good Men guy or the firm guy. You know, he was a good actor, he was in competent dramas and comedies, but he wasn't really an action star yet. And with this movie, he proved that not only was he very into the idea of doing stunt work, but he really could sell those stunts and make them look realistic while also giving a charismatic performance. And it's by far the most suspenseful entry in the entire series. This movie was much more focused on building suspense and tension, and that's one of the things that I love about the first Mission Impossible movie. Now, one of the things these movies have that really benefit it is the fact that the exposition scenes that are required to explain to the audience what's going to happen, we all want that. We want to hear the tape. We want to hear him say the famous, "This tape will self-destruct in 5 seconds." We want to hear all those things because they're staples of Mission Impossible, and yet they're giving us an exposition scene, which a lot of writers and filmmakers are always trying to figure out how to make less obvious. But with the Mission Impossible movies, similar to the Indiana Jones movies, when they're explaining their mission and setting it up, we want to hear all these things because they're fun, exciting summer movie things. We like hearing the spies get together and talk about what they're going to do and their famous gadgets and all of that kind of stuff. His direction is actually very smart here. He does a lot of really subtle things in the timing of the editing and the way he moves the camera and the way he frames certain shots that took it way beyond a summer blockbuster level of direction you might expect from a movie called Mission Impossible. Like in the opening scene with the team hearing from Jim Phelps, almost always the team is framed in a wide. We don't get like a really obvious close-up here telling us who our hero is. The focus here is on the team. Ethan Hunt has not yet proved himself to us as the audience, so he frames the team in a wide to show us this team as a whole and that these are the guys we're going to be focusing on. Also, on a side note, as a kid, I always wanted the fruit stripe gum because it reminded me of the iconic gum from this movie. Red light, green light. Press them together. Hasta lasagna, don't get any on ya. Emilio Estevez. Nice to see you in this movie, buddy. And what I was most satisfied with watching this movie last night is that even though it's almost 20 years old, this movie holds up extremely well. The action is all very well crafted, it still looks realistic, it's very tightly edited, and the pace never wavers. In fact, this is one of the movies from the 90s that I think has actually gotten better with age. Brian De Palma uses a lot of old-fashioned techniques in this movie, like cross dissolves. If you watch carefully, he uses a lot of cross dissolves in this movie, as well as fade-outs, and this gives it sort of an old-fashioned 1960s sense to it. Another thing I love about this movie is its portrayal of Ethan Hunt. He's a very vulnerable hero. He's not a superhero in this movie. Early on in the movie, you can feel his distress. He's constantly worried. After his entire team dies around him, and he meets with Kittredge in that restaurant, and they have that very off-kilter scene in which he starts to suspect things are going on, and he describes that all the people in the restaurant are the same people he saw at the party. That's a brilliant scene, but you feel his mind starting to snap a little bit throughout that moment, and De Palma's use of Dutch angles really sold that. But after that great scene with the water tank exploding and he runs back to the safe house, he's still extremely paranoid. He's breaking light bulbs all over the floor in case someone steps on them. He's looking around every corner. You can tell this guy's essentially a fugitive now. He's a man on the run. The choice to make our hero basically a fugitive made for a much more interesting protagonist. It made his mission seem seem impossible, it made him seem insignificant. And that's one of the things that I thought made his character a lot more interesting, and some guy you could actually root for, because he really does feel like the little guy, even though he has all this knowledge of IMF. Now, one of my flaws with this movie is its portrayal of the internet. The movie came out in 1996, the internet was very new, and filmmakers at that time were still kind of like, we can get away with some stuff because the internet's like this floaty thing out there that not everyone knows about yet, so we'll just make the internet do all these things. And the portrayal of the internet in this movie is a little bit laughable, especially if you watch it now. It's by far the most dated aspect of this movie. Also, the plot. It's very hard to follow. I've seen the film multiple times now, and I still have to pay attention to every word out of these characters' mouths to make sure I don't miss anything. But is that really a negative? That you actually have to pay attention? I don't think so. I think films that force you to pay attention to every line of dialogue, that's great. I'm sick and tired of movies where I can actually just sort of check out and not miss anything. Mission Impossible is the rare summer blockbuster that uses your brain, that makes you really have to pay attention. And once we meet Ving Rhames and Reno as the support, I gotta say, Ving Rhames in this movie is perfect casting. I'm telling you, there is no other actor I can envision playing Luther Stickle. He is such a great idea. In fact, if I were to read this script, I would never picture Ving Rhames as this character because it's a computer hacker. He loves his technology. He's really great at hacking into government things. If you read that script, would you picture Ving Rhames? I wouldn't. I would picture like some skinny, nerdy guy with glasses. But Ving Rhames as Luther Stickle is one of the things that made each Mission Impossible movie as good as it could be. I also love the setup for the CIA scene, the way Tom Cruise explains it and the way Brian De Palma shows it to us, because it sets it up as a truly impossible task. And you're sitting there and you're getting really tense thinking about all these things these characters are going to have to do. That's one of the best ways to set up a scene that's meant to build suspense. You have to make it seem insurmountable. You have to describe it in some way that makes us as the audience understand just how hard and difficult it's going to be. And the infiltration of the CIA remains one of the most suspenseful scenes I've ever seen. I get goosebumps every time the knife drops. The use of minimal music and almost no sound was not only a ballsy move for a big summer blockbuster, but a scene that each film thus far has tributed in one sense or another, always having at least one sequence with Ethan hanging from a rope. And one of the best scenes in this movie is when Ethan discovers that Jim is still alive, and then they have this conversation where Jim tells his version of the story, and Ethan is agreeing with him through his dialogue. He's able to maintain this facade that he understands him and agrees with him, but we see in his head that he's actually figuring out the real details of Jim Phelps's betrayal. It's a fantastic scene that's really clever, and Danny Elfman added a lot with his musical choir in the background. Now, I love the train scene in this movie, and almost every shot in it still holds up remarkably well almost 20 years later. I love Danny Elfman's score throughout this scene, and one of my favorite moments that no one ever talks about is when Ethan connects the helicopter to the back of the train, turns towards Krieger, and just screams at him. There was no dialogue necessary. That scream to his face just sold everything he needed to know. This scene also contains one of my favorite movie explosions of all time, with Tom Cruise literally being blown into frame. It's the kind of explosion that only a 90s action movie could get away with, and I love Elfman's use of the theme in this moment. It's so adrenaline fueled. Every time I see that scene where he leaps onto the edge of the helicopter, takes the gum and sticks it onto the chopper, I love it. It's such a great moment. It's like you see the protagonist, he's proving himself all along the way. He's not just a grunt worker who can impersonate other people. He's proving himself throughout the entire movie. He steals the knock-list from the CIA, and in this moment he rises above his former boss, who is now his villain, and it just makes for this amazing thing where it's like, Ethan Hunt, you are the ultimate badass. Good job, man. And also, this is a really minor thing, but I love the way the film cuts to black before the big explosion of music. It's really subtle editing choices like that that have always impressed me about this movie. Now, I've waited to the end to talk about this because I have one big issue with this movie, and it's kind of a plot hole. See, throughout the years, I've always been a little confused about the Drake Hotel Bible scene, where he looks at the Bible, he sees that it's stamped by the Drake Hotel, and then in his head he's able to connect that Jim Phelps is really Job, that Jim Phelps is the bad guy. Now, I understand that the reason behind that is that Jim Phelps took that Bible from the Drake Hotel in Chicago to a completely different country so that he could then quote the scriptures needed to correspond with Max through emails. So we find out that Jim Phelps is really Job, thus Jim Phelps is really alive, thus Jim Phelps is really the bad guy. I get all of that. The one line of dialogue that makes it all confusing for me is when Max is looking at Tom Cruise and says, Job was not known to quote scripture. But then later in the film, Jim Phelps says, thou shalt not covet another man's wife. So he does quote scripture. So did he need the Bible to quote the scripture which told Tom Cruise that this is the bad guy? But then Max said that he doesn't usually quote scripture. It's honestly just that one line of dialogue from Max that makes it all a little confusing for me. Besides that, I love Mission Impossible. It's one of my favorite action movies. I think it has fantastic direction, a very cool hero, great score, great stunts. Everything about the movie also moves very well, and the characters are really entertaining, especially Ving Rhames as Luther Stickle. I'm gonna give Mission Impossible an A. And one other thing that's really remarkable about this movie, there are no shootout scenes and Ethan Hunt never once fires a gun. That's just another thing about the script and Brian De Palma as a director. They didn't resort to a very easy action scene, a big shootout scene. They had it all be suspense and espionage, and I love that about this movie. But if viewers wanted more gunfights, they certainly got that in Mission Impossible 2. My review for that will be coming very soon. Guys, let me know what you think of the first Mission Impossible movie in the comments below, and thank you so much as always for watching. And if you like this, you can click right here and get Stuckmanized.